Daemon would be a second Maegor, or worse. He is impulsive and violent. It is the duty of this council to protect the king and the realm from him.
Fire and Blood provides a written record of the Targaryen kings and the happenings in Westeros from the time of Aegon's conquest. It captures the accounts of the Grand Maesters, Septons, and the occasional court jester to offer readers a first-hand point of view into the rise of the Dragon Kings, ending Part 1 just after the Dance of the Dragons. The period known as the Dance of the Dragons is mainly recorded by three sources: Septon Eustace, Grand Maester Runciter, and the Fool Mushroom. It is well known that the perspectives of the Septons and Maesters are consistently aligned with the interests of Oldtown and House Hightower, while as the court fool, Mushroom spent far more time in the presence of the Targaryens in King's Landing and on Dragonstone. Keeping those details in mind, we can interpret the story accordingly. These men did not always agree upon particulars, and at times their accounts considerably vary with one another. However, on one point, Mushroom, Septon Eustace, Grand Maester Runciter, and all other sources concur. Sir Otto Hightower, the king's hand, took a great dislike to the king's brother, Daemon Targaryen. Sir Otto Hightower came to King's Landing to serve Old King Jaehaerys after the untimely death of Prince Balon in 101 AC, who was father to Viserys and Daemon. Sir Otto brought his wife and children with him, including his daughter Alicent, who became a constant companion to the old king, something left out of the show House of the Dragon. Alicent would read to Jaehaerys, fetch his meals, even bathe him. After his death in 103, King Viserys ascended the Iron Throne, and Otto remained at court in his position as hand to the new king. He served ably in the position, but according to Fire and Blood, the longer he served, the more imperious Sir Otto became. History names Daemon Targaryen as the greatest of Sir Otto's rivals. Prince Daemon had earned his knight's spurs at age 16, one of the youngest knights ever, and he had been given the Targaryen ancestral sword Dark Sister by the Old King himself, in recognition of his prowess. Daemon wed the Lady of Runestone, Rhea Royce, in 97 AC, but the marriage had not been a success. Daemon even petitioned his brother, once he had ascended the throne, to have his marriage set aside, but King Viserys denied the request. He did, however, bring Daemon back to court to sit on the small council, serving as Master of Coin for a year and Master of Laws for half a year. Counting coppers was ill-suited to the warrior prince, and so he was again reassigned to commander of the city watch. He turned the ragged unit into proper officers, equipping them with dirk, short sword, and cudgel, and gave them long golden cloaks from which they take their name. The gold cloaks served proudly under Daemon, and he was known as Prince of the City and Lord Fleabottom. Ironically, it had been Sir Otto who had convinced the king to remove his brother as Master of Coin and Master of Laws, but the Hand soon came to regret those decisions. As commander of the city watch, Daemon's popularity only grew amongst the small folk and the men under his command. However, he had not yet been named his brother's successor, so Sir Otto set about contriving a plan to press for Rhaenyra to be named heir over Prince Daemon. In a letter to his brother, the Lord of Oldtown, Otto wrote, "On no account can Prince Daemon be allowed to ascend the Iron Throne. He would be a second Maegor the Cruel, or worse. Better the realm's delight than Lord Fleabottom." The enmity between Sir Otto and Prince Daemon only grew over the years as the Hand became closer to King Viserys while pushing Daemon out of the picture little by little. In Episode 1 of House of the Dragon, when pressing for Rhaenyra to be named successor, he makes the claim that if Daemon ascended the throne, he would be a second Maegor or worse. According to Otto, he is violent and impulsive, and it is the duty of the small council to protect the king and the realm from him. We have to ask ourselves, what has Daemon done to prove that he is all of the things that Otto says he is? Up to this point, Daemon has been relatively well behaved. He is an accomplished knight, he married who he was told to, and lived unhappily in the Vale for many years. He took on whatever position Viserys assigned him, whether it was Master of Coin or Master of Laws. As commander of the Gold Cloaks, his discipline may have been brutal, but he made the city far more safe and orderly, and the small folk loved him for it. Everything Prince Daemon did was to stay close to his brother and to serve him.
You've only ever tried to send me away to the Vale, to the City Watch, anywhere but by your side. 10 years you've been king, and yet not once have you asked me to be your hand.
Sir Otto has antagonized Daemon for years in his attempt to frame the prince as someone too treacherous to keep near the king. And because Otto has worked to remove him from positions of responsibility, he has set him up to look as though he is too irresponsible and unpredictable to handle a seat of office.
I named Daemon Master of Laws, but you said he was a tyrant. As Master of Coin, you said he was a spendthrift that would beggar the realm. Putting Daemon in command of the City Watch was your solution.
The comparison Otto makes of Daemon to Maegor the Cruel is baseless and fabricated. However, the subject of Maegor in relation to the Hightowers and to Old Town is entirely nuanced and nearly as complicated as the Dance of the Dragons itself. Maegor Targaryen is remembered for his cruelty, but he also represented the pinnacle of Targaryen might in Westeros, because, as he put it, the Iron Throne should go to the man with the strength to seize it. Maegor proved to be a more formidable ruler than his nephew Prince Aegon, and when the two met on Dragonback above the God's Eye, Aegon's dragon Quicksilver proved to be no match for Maegor's mount, Balerion the Black Dread. Maegor resumed his position as king with the regalia of the Conqueror's Crown and both of the Targaryen ancestral swords, Blackfyre and Dark Sister. He married Prince Aegon's widow, Rhaena, and named their daughter Arrea his heir, as he had no children of his own. Maegor's relationship with Old Town was a major focal point of his reign. Factions of the Faith Militant, who took orders from the High Septon in Old Town, terrorized the countryside and punished Targaryen loyalists. The poor fellows even made assassination attempts on King Aenys and his family in their own home in King's Landing. They were forced to flee to Dragonstone, where Queen Visenya advised using his dragon to resolve the issue, but Aenys was weak. Maegor was not. When he took the crown after Aenys' death, one of his first acts was to fight in a battle of 7 against the warrior sons, at the end of which Maegor was the last man standing. However, he fell into a coma for 28 days. When he rose again, healed by the sorceress Tiana of Pentos, he mounted Balerion and headed for the Sept of Remembrance, where he burned the warrior sons and poor fellows who resided there. He then flew to the Westerlands and Visenya to the Riverlands on Vhagar, and burned the holdings of the lords who supported and sheltered the poor fellows. He then made for Old Town. The High Septon in Old Town condemned the marriage between Prince Aegon and his sister Princess Rhaena, who were the eldest children of King Aenys, naming their children abominations in the eyes of the gods. He also denounced Maegor for taking a second wife, Alice Haraway, daughter of the Lord of Harrenhal. Maegor's first wife was the daughter of the Lord of Old Town, Otto Hightower. They had been married when Maegor was just 13 years old, and she was 23. However, their marriage had not been successful, and Maegor claimed that Cerise was barren, and he had taken a second wife in order to produce an heir. Maegor and Cerise had been married for 14 years before he took a second wife. The High Septon died suddenly under mysterious circumstances the night before Maegor's arrival, and was replaced by the far more amiable Septon Pater, who welcomed Maegor and his decrees against the warrior sons, either executing them or sending them to the wall. Maegor remained in Old Town and held court from the Hightower for half a year. Cerys and Maegor were reunited in Old Town and their union consummated. Cerys agreed to accept Maegor's other wives so long as her rights and incomes as queen were restored. They returned to King's Landing together, and though Maegor visited one of his 3 wives each night, he still had no heir. Unfortunately, Cerys Hightower fell ill about a year after returning to King's Landing and died. There were rumors surrounding her death, such as she had made shrewish remarks and the king had ordered her tongue cut out, but she struggled so much that her throat was accidentally cut. The story has been widely contested by historians and believed to be slander concocted by enemies of the king. While Maegor is known for his cruelty, he is also remembered as defiant, a quality not possessed by his older brother. Much like with Viserys and Daemon, Old Town tolerated a king they could control, but the unpredictable younger brother was another story. Jaehaerys took the throne following his uncle Maegor, and the entirety of his policy was that he was the anti-Maegor. He was kind, just, and fair, but he also towed the line and was relatively agreeable with the demands of the Faith of the Seven and the power of Old Town. The doctrine of exceptionalism was created under his reign, which prevented the further discrimination against Targaryen incest in the name of conserving their connection to their dragons. Jaehaerys even sent a son to the Citadel to become Archmaester, and more than one daughter to the Faith to become a Septa. With all of this in mind, it seems very likely that these things were already going through Otto's head when he took on the position of Hand of the King. He was already thinking this far ahead in the game, which really calls back to the Grand Maester conspiracy. The framing of circumstances being so similar to Maegor's history is evidence of the Hightowers, the Faith, and Citadel planning this out far in advance, as a way to destroy the House of the Dragon from within. Otto lacks the crucial evidence needed in order to lay such a claim as the coming of a second Maegor at the feet of Daemon Targaryen. And the erroneous declarations only expose a level of detail and planning going on behind the closed doors of the Hand and his connections back in Old Town. Otto is willing to lay plans in place to usurp the throne from Rhaenyra, which he worked so hard to have her named heir to, in order to keep the crown out of Daemon's clutches on the premise that he would be equal to Maegor in his disciplines. Perhaps it is Otto who fears that Daemon can see exactly what he's been doing since he arrived at court to serve as hand to his grandfather Jaehaerys, following the untimely death of his own father Balon, and followed by the demise of his brother Viserys. Daemon did have a few things in common with Maegor. They were both knighted at the age of 16. They were both given the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister as a reward for their prowess. They were both second sons. They were both in fruitless marriages for 14 years before considering a second wife. Beyond that, there is little evidence for this comparison. While Otto has spent a lifetime planting fears among courtiers about the dangers of Daemon Targaryen, he has also underestimated another person who may have even more in common with Maegor the Cruel than Daemon supposedly ever did. Aemond Targaryen is also the second son of the king, and has worked his whole life to prove himself and his own strength. Much like Maegor, Aemond did not claim a dragon until he was older, but when he finally chose his mount, he made sure no one missed it. Just as Maegor waited for Balerion the Black Dread, Aemond waited for his moment to claim Vhagar, and as Balerion was in his day, Vhagar is the oldest, largest, and most fearsome dragon alive. She is the only dragon surviving from the days of the conquest. Each paid a mighty price for the taking of their dragons. Maegor had to wait for his father, Aegon the Conqueror, to die before he could claim Balerion, and Aemond had to lose an eye, though he counts it as a fair exchange. Both Aemond and Maegor were the younger and more capable brothers to their older counterparts. Aemond serves as regent when Aegon is wounded at Rook's Rest and has the opportunity to seize the throne for himself, but resists. Similarly, King Aenys told Maegor that they would rule the realm together and gifted him with the second Targaryen ancestral sword, Blackfyre. Maegor could have easily taken the throne at that point or any point during Aenys' reign. However, both Aemond and Maegor showed restraint out of respect and love for their brothers and the tradition of their house. While flying a much larger, older, and more experienced dragon, Aemond killed his nephew Lucerys in the skies above Storm's End, while Maegor killed his nephew Aegon in the battle beneath the God's Eye. Both were called accursed kinslayers going forward. Both Aemond and Maegor find a paramour in the daughters of the Lord of Harrenhal. With Maegor, it was his second wife, Alyce Harroway, and with Aemond, it was Alyce Rivers, natural daughter of Sir Lionel Strong, who was hand to King Viserys. When Maegor learns of Alyce's rumored indiscretions, he murders Alyce and her entire family and burns Harrenhal and Lord Harroway's town upon Balerion. But not only that, when Maegor fights the Faith Militant, he burns several houses in the Westerlands while his mother Visenya takes Vhagar to the Riverlands to do the same. Likewise, Aemond burns Harrenhal after learning that Daemon and Rhaenyra had taken King's Landing in his absence. Afterwards, he takes Vhagar to the Riverlands and burns several holdings in revenge. So when Aemond burns the Riverlands, it's not Vhagar's first time bringing fire and blood to that region. Finally, Aemond fights his uncle Daemon with their dragons in the battle above the God's Eye, where, despite Aemond having the older and larger dragon, Daemon is able to use his expertise to defeat his nephew. Maegor also fought his nephew in the battle beneath the God's Eye, where he and Balerion easily defeated Prince Aegon and his young dragon, Quicksilver. While these scenes both portray nephew battling uncle, in the case of the dance, it is the nephew who has the older and larger dragon, but the uncle dominates the battle with experience and skill over size and strength. Clearly, Daemon and Aemond are written as parallels to one another, each representing the warrior archetype for their respective houses. So it would go without saying that if Daemon were truly a second Maegor, then Aemond too reflects Maegor's characteristics. And we can find that Aemond actually shares much more in common with Maegor than his uncle ever did. Maegor's characteristics, which are shared and embodied by both Daemon and Aemond, are that of a fierce and fearless ruler who puts their family's supremacy and hegemony first and foremost. And while that may seem unsavory to some, the fact of the matter is that the Targaryens had dragons, which set them apart from normal men. As Rhaenyra says, without the dragons, they are just like everyone else. But that's not the story we are examining. Here, they do have dragons, which are identified with being closer to gods than men. The Targaryens are predestined to rule, in this story and in this world, because of their extraordinary connection to a primordial creature. Otto Hightower has spent his life making an enemy of Daemon Targaryen and forcing a narrative on the prince that he simply had no proof of. Otto's bias against Daemon stems from the past, when Maegor Targaryen had taken a Hightower wife who was planted in his life in a similar way that Alicent has been placed in the Targaryen family. However, when Otto made the initial decision to involve his family in this way, perhaps he did not consider that when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. And unfortunately, his choices cost the lives of nearly his entire family because he cast his lot on taking down a family of dragon lords and the primal creatures from which they draw their power. Daemon spent his life being forced into a corner by a man who stood between brother and king, and whenever Daemon was not present, the Hand spent his time painting the prince as a dangerous individual who would see the realm descend into fire and blood if he were to take the throne. Otto held no proof to paint Daemon as such, because he had only done impressive things leading up to this point. Daemon's goal was to be as close to his brother as possible so he could protect his family. But Otto's goal was always to drive a wedge between the brothers and weaken the Targaryen dynasty so that he could be the person to clean up the mess and prove his importance. There is one scene in particular which really highlights just how antagonistic Otto was to Daemon, and yet Daemon never lashed out in the way that Otto expected him to. This is the scene of Laena Velaryon's funeral, where the king's family traveled to Driftmark to pay their respects to Daemon's late wife. Daemon and his daughters had made the long journey from Pentos to lay Laena to rest in the tradition of the Velaryons, and who showed up at the funeral alongside the king but Otto Hightower. Otto was not hand to the king at this time. It was just days after the death of Lionel Strong and his son Harwin. And yet, no matter how fat the leech grows, it always returns for another meal. With regards to everything Otto has claimed about Daemon over the years, why on earth would he feel it was appropriate to go to Laena Velaryon's funeral? It's not only disrespectful to Daemon, but also to Corlys and Rhaenys, who had also tried to marry Laena to King Viserys. There is bad blood between Otto Hightower and everyone on Driftmark, so his presence was nothing more than to antagonize the people in mourning. Otto's biggest failure was illuminating Daemon as someone who must be crushed at all costs, because he only made the prince that much more fascinating in the eyes of those around him, including his grandson, Aemond. Aemond strives to prove himself as a warrior despite the insecurities he has carried since childhood. One of the biggest tragedies of this story is the fact that, because these families were never allowed to bond, they never shared the knowledge which could have maintained their greatness. Aemond could have shared in the ancestral knowledge of the Valyrians and their dragon riding abilities, but unfortunately, without the veneration that comes with this learning, he used his own dragon as a weapon of mass destruction to pacify his temper. Maegor never had children, and his wife Cerys Hightower never became pregnant. To compare their marriage to Alicent and Viserys is next to impossible, because Alicent actually gave birth to 4 of his children. Otto Hightower never possessed the knowledge to manage the situation beyond that, because his grandchildren had already surpassed him with power when they inherited the ability to ride dragons. He set up his entire family for a disastrous, self-fulfilling prophecy in an attempt to overthrow a dynasty that his own blood was intertwined with at his own behest. Daemon was never a second Maegor, but that statement created a dangerous precedent that the lengths Maegor was willing to go to were the parameters of cruelty. Daemon was never one to play by anyone else's rules, but Aemond has found a way to push every boundary set by the actions of Maegor the Cruel. Let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments below, and if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And consider joining my Patreon or channel memberships to help support the work I do here. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!
The gods have yet to make a man who lacks the patience for absolute power, Your Grace. Under such circumstances, it would not be an aberration for the king.
We installed Prince Daemon as commander to promote law and order. The criminal element should fear the City Watch.
Thank you for your support, Lord Corlys.
Look at what he did with the Gold Cloaks. The City Watch is fiercely loyal to him, an army 2,000 strong.
An army you gave him, Otto.
Either by design or accident.
What are you saying? My brother would murder me, take my crown. Are you?
Send a raven to Old Town, straight away.